Hello! This being such an important presentation, I'd rather not leave it up to this buffoon. Getting started then. I suppose you're wondering what I've been doing for the past 3 months. Well, I've been completing some mini projects, and a big one. I'd like to briefly go over the smaller ones first though. Both Luke Day and Stacey Daly, not on the same day, asked me to make their apps move. They both gave me a storyboard, and I improvised the rest. I also briefly looked at the Big Sleep book cover competition and designed my own based on research I'd done.
Better watch your step, Clarence.
I know this doesn't include any kind of motion, but I just felt like doing a spot of illustration to break things up a little bit. Sophie Gibson also asked me to help her with her album cover. She needed various illustrations doing because she didn't want to use any stock images. So I drew 2 planets colliding into one another, some mountains, and a dude pointing at the planets. Me and Sophie have also redesigned our Envisage app, coming up with a new aesthetic to make it brighter and friendlier. If you remember, this app would monitor your breathing pace and would play corresponding sounds in order to relax you. We found that your heart rate can be recorded by placing your finger on your phone's camera, so that solved that. Now for my main project. I knew from the start I wanted my subject to be video games, because I have a passion for them. However, I never thought it would turn out the way it has. More recently, games have come under attack once again, this attack being the accusation that games cause violence. Now, my brief was that I wanted to find a way to inform people that this just isn't true. So my first idea, which was just off the top of my head, was to show violent historical figures being violent. For example, I would show Genghis Khan killing a bunch of people, and then it's saying at the end, well, he's violent and, you know, games don't exist. This idea wasn't really grounded, so I went back to the drawing board, and rather than doing what I normally do, which is the first idea that pops into my head, which would be the previous idea, I decided to actually do research. Research such as finding studies conducted on children since the 1970s to try and prove violence has a connection with games. Also, finding studies about certain people gaining information from games that proved useful in everyday life. Some research into how violent games are good for you. How crime has gone down while the rise of people playing games has gone up. Research into how politicians can be against games but support terrible wars for money. And how some politicians would rather blame games than the sale of guns in our own country. And much more for context. Also at this time I discovered a motion designer called Fraser Davidson. His animations are often animated around a person's speech and manage to make an otherwise dry subject extremely entertaining and interesting. So I looked at a bunch of his videos. On the other side of the coin, I also found a games journalist who shares my views on this subject and other parts of the games industry, so I bet you know what I'm going to do next. I took the games journalist's speeches and then animated to them in the style of Fraser Davidson, first typing out his speeches, then putting animations to certain sentences. Overall it worked well, and now I'm going to show you one that I did about corporate greed for a test.
Halo 4 King of the Hill fueled by Mountain Dew, a game where you scan Mountain Dew and Doritos barcodes inside 7-Elevens, sounds like a joke. It's not, it's real. Now, games and marketing have been in bed for a long time. We all remember titles like Yo Noid and Cool Spot, sometimes even fondly. Hell, Biker Mice from Mars was a game promoting a cartoon, promoting a toy line that had Snickers adverts in it. Yeah, we were kids then and stupid, so we accepted it. But even compared to the advert games of yesteryear, Halo 4 Purred by Mountain Dew may be the pinnacle, the zenith, the perfect example of the sickeningly incestuous world of excessive cross-promotion and indulgent corporate backrubbing.
I thought it worked well. Some feedback from some said it was a little too fast to process all the information. Others said it would be nice to see each scene a little more animated to add life. I took all this feedback on board and then made another test. This one worked much better, as it was a little slower and each scene was more entertaining.
For all the claims out there that video games desensitize us to violence, when faced with real scenes of violence with real blood and real death, the human brain, well, it has a way of telling the difference and treating it very differently. See, gamers don't want real violence. Real violence, like in the footage of Bud Dwyer, is understated, not glamorous at all. There are no popped heads with showers of tomato sauce blood everywhere. Nobody gets a dramatic final death speech. If video game violence in even the most realistic game is over the top and cartoony, it has to be. Same goes for movies. You know when someone's punched in real life, you don't get that thwack noise the movies put in. When someone's shot in real life, it's not after emptying a massive clip of ammo and accompanied by a Wilhelm scream.
So after all this, I was planning on animating one big speech of the games journalists. However, I couldn't really find one speech that covered everything I wanted to be said. So using all the research I'd conducted, I did my own, which took forever. But it was worth it. Anyway, now you're vaguely up to speed, here it is. Video games have been around for a near 40 years now, starting back in the early 70s with games like Pong and later Space Invaders. However, as time has gone by, games have evolved, and so have the concepts that drive them. Graphics have improved beyond belief, and at this current time, it is clear that they're only going to get more photorealistic. Now, with all this in mind, one thing that has always plagued video games, particularly violent ones, is that they're always associated with violent behaviour. Politicians, for example, favour linking violent activities and violent video games. Now, it is true that any game can cause outbursts of anger at the time of play. I don't get frustrated with a game and then carry around that anger with me for the rest of the day. Studies have been carried out to try and prove that violent games cause prolonged violent outbursts. One half of these studies are funded by people who want results and therefore get them. The other half aren't and give clearer evidence. I'm not going to tell you about every result, so I'll give you a breakdown. The majority say that games cause anger, in some, but don't have any prolonged effect. The reason I'm talking about video game violence is to really let you know that there's nothing to fear. Reason number 1. Imagine the game as a giant punching bag. It's a great way of relieving stress. Reason number 2. Certain games can improve response times and even reflexes. Reason number 3. It makes information more memorable and translates skills into the real world for use. Now, I know what you're going to say. If someone can learn how to shoot a gun in a game, and they can do it in real life too. Well, I suppose I can't really argue with that. Guns are in games, and that's a thing. Just like cars, people, and physics. Just because guns are in games doesn't mean you're going to shoot people. However, people who have interest in shooting people will probably also play these games. It doesn't really mean that the games themselves cause them to shoot people, it just means that they're mad and also play these games. So since the recent shooting in America, people started blaming games again, just like every other shooting of the past 20 years or so. For example, the cause of the Columbine massacre was blamed on TV shows, music and games. For the Sandy Hook shooting, however, games have been favoured instead of Marilyn Manson. Which brings me to my last point. In 2011, there were roughly 130,000 gun shops and only roughly 14,000 McDonald's restaurants in America. That's a lot of guns, and guns are bad. They're designed to quickly dispatch multiple aggressors with relative ease, with little to no training. Why is it you have a country where people can freely buy weapons of this power? Then when a person uses these weapons, you blame games. Now I get that in order for a person to reach the point where they commit their crime, they have to have a catalyst. However, these kinds of people will commit a crime like this eventually regardless. Giving them the tools in which to do it faster and on a wider scale, well, it's completely insane. People who feel they need to kill don't do so because of games. They do it because somewhere in their life something has traumatized them, affected them in some way, not because Call of Duty told them to do it.